The story of how Paint Your Wagon was created begins not in Hollywood, but on Broadway, where the original 1951 musical, written by Alan J. Lerner with music by Frederick Loewe, found moderate success as part of the golden era of American theater, though it never reached the legendary status of My Fair Lady or Camelot. Even so, its unique blend of Western adventure, romance, and folk-inspired melodies intrigued certain Hollywood producers, who saw potential in adapting the story for the big screen. By the early 1960s, with Hollywood shifting towards large-scale, expensive musicals in the wake of The Sound of Music, 1965, and My Fair Lady, 1964, Paramount Pictures began looking for potential properties to capitalize on the trend, and Paint Your Wagon found itself unexpectedly at the center of attention. The studio executives, particularly Robert Evans, who had become a powerhouse in Hollywood with his ability to blend commercial appeal with ambitious productions, saw Paint Your Wagon as an opportunity to create a new kind of Western, one infused with the grandeur of musical storytelling but infused with grittier realism and star power to attract audiences who might otherwise dismiss the genre. The idea of turning a Broadway musical into a Western film spectacle was unorthodox, and initial discussions centered on how to update the story to better suit the medium of cinema while appealing to an audience that was growing increasingly skeptical of traditional musicals. The original stage production followed a more whimsical, structured narrative about gold prospectors, love, and loss, but Paramount wanted a different approach, one that leaned into the rugged masculinity of the Western genre rather than the refined elegance of Broadway. However, this posed a major problem. Traditional Westerns and musicals often had vastly different audiences, with the former associated with John Wayne-style rugged individualism and action, and the latter tied to highly choreographed, often fantastical storytelling. The challenge, therefore, was how to blend these elements seamlessly, especially at a time when the Western genre was already evolving with films like The Good, The Bad and the Ugly, 1966, which had begun pushing boundaries with more morally complex characters and a darker, more violent tone. Paramount needed a director with experience handling epics, and they first approached Joshua Logan, a Broadway-turned-Hollywood director known for helming stage adaptations like South Pacific, 1958, and Camelot, 1967. Logan, however, had a reputation for struggling with large productions, and his previous efforts had not been universally well received, yet he was seen as someone who could at least bring a sense of theatricality to the production. The project's greenlighting came after months of deliberation, with several different scripts being considered before the studio finally committed to fully developing the film. Logan, despite his initial hesitation, was lured in by the promise of a large budget and the chance to work with A-list Hollywood stars, something that Broadway often lacked. One of the biggest challenges from the outset was deciding how much of the original Broadway musical's tone and structure to preserve, as executives feared that the stage version's lighter, almost comedic take on gold prospecting would feel outdated or unrealistic for a film adaptation. This led to the decision to rewrite much of the narrative, eliminating certain characters, adjusting song placements, and inserting entirely new elements that would give the film a more cinematic flow. Paramount initially wanted a leading man who could both sing and act, but they quickly realized that the kind of rugged stars dominating westerns at the time, Clint Eastwood, Steve McQueen, and Paul Newman, were not seasoned singers, and the actors who could sing lacked the kind of physicality needed to convincingly play hardened prospectors. This led to a crucial decision. Rather than finding actors who could sing beautifully, they would cast major stars first and make the music secondary, an approach that would eventually lead to some of the most infamous musical performances in Hollywood history. As development continued, Paramount increased the film's budget significantly, believing that it had the potential to be the next great Hollywood musical, comparable to Oklahoma or The Sound of Music, though doubts loomed over whether audiences were still interested in extravagant song and dance productions in an era shifting towards grittier, more socially conscious filmmaking. With the project officially moving forward, Paramount set out to secure a screenplay that would adapt the Broadway show into something that felt fresh, modern, and suited for the big screen, marking the beginning of what would become a long, turbulent journey in rewriting and restructuring the core story of Paint Your Wagon. Once Paint Your Wagon was officially greenlit, Paramount faced one of its biggest obstacles, adapting the Broadway musical into a film that would appeal to 1960s moviegoers, who were becoming increasingly skeptical of traditional musicals. The studio hired Paddy Chayefsky, one of the most respected screenwriters of the time, known for his sharp, realistic dialogue and socially conscious storytelling, to take a pass at the script. However, Chayefsky quickly clashed with the studio over the film's direction. He envisioned a grittier, more introspective Western that stripped away most of the music and focused on the harsh realities of frontier life, but Paramount wanted to retain the film's musical identity. After months of disagreements, Chayefsky left the project, frustrated by what he saw as an impossible balancing act between the film's commercial aspirations and its artistic integrity. The studio then turned to Alan J. Lerner, the original Broadway lyricist and librettist, hoping that he could rework the script into something more commercially viable while preserving the essence of the musical. Lerner, however, had little experience writing for film, and his initial draft was far too stage-bound, failing to make use of the cinematic medium's potential for sweeping landscapes and dynamic storytelling. This led Paramount to bring in additional screenwriters to refine the script, leading to constant rewrites and conflicting visions. The biggest change came with the decision to drastically alter the story's central premise. Rather than focusing on a straightforward romance between a prospector's daughter and a young newcomer, as in the stage version, the film would instead center around two grizzled miners, Ben Rumson and Pardner, who inadvertently find themselves in a bizarre three-way marriage with a woman named Elizabeth. This unusual twist, which was meant to make the story more mature and comedic, was met with skepticism, but Paramount believed it would add an element of unpredictability that would distinguish the film from both conventional westerns and traditional musicals. With these changes, however, came significant challenges in terms of tone. The Broadway musical had a whimsical, light-hearted feel, but the new screenplay veered between bawdy comedy, romantic melodrama, and moments of unexpected darkness, making it difficult to find a consistent mood. Director Joshua Logan, who had finally agreed to take on the film, struggled to make sense of the shifting tones, feeling that the project was becoming increasingly unfocused. Another major issue was deciding which songs to keep from the original musical and which to replace. Some of the stage show songs were considered too old-fashioned for a 1960s audience, while others didn't fit the new, revised story. Lerner fought to retain as many of his original compositions as possible, but the studio insisted on hiring a new composer, Andre Previn, to help modernize the music. This led to intense battles between the creative teams, with some songs being rewritten multiple times and others being cut entirely, much to Lerner's frustration. As rewrites continued, the film's budget began to balloon, with constant script changes leading to delays in pre-production. Paramount executives grew increasingly concerned that the film was losing focus, but by this point, they had already committed significant resources to the project and felt they had no choice but to move forward. The constant script revisions also affected casting negotiations, as actors were reluctant to sign on to a film that seemed to be in a state of flux. Clint Eastwood, who had recently risen to fame with Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy, expressed interest but had reservations about the film's musical aspects, while Lee Marvin, an established tough guy actor, was intrigued by the comedic elements but unsure about the singing. Despite the behind-the-scenes turmoil, the film's grand ambitions continued to grow, with Paramount pushing for elaborate set designs, extensive location shoots, and a star-studded cast that would ensure box office success. However, as the screenplay continued to evolve, it became increasingly clear that Paint Your Wagon was no longer a faithful adaptation of the Broadway show, but something entirely different. A massive, sprawling Western epic with musical numbers awkwardly woven into the story. The script's constant evolution made it difficult for anyone involved to fully grasp what kind of movie they were making, setting the stage for what would become one of the most troubled productions in Hollywood history. With the screenplay still in flux, Paramount faced the next major challenge: assembling a cast that could balance the rugged Western aesthetic with the demands of a musical. The studio wanted major Hollywood names to ensure commercial success, but finding actors who could convincingly play gold prospectors while also carrying musical numbers proved to be a daunting task. The first major casting decision was Ben Rumson, the hard-drinking, rough-edged prospector at the heart of the film. Paramount's first choice was Lee Marvin, an established action star with a reputation for playing hardened, no-nonsense characters. Marvin was fresh off his Academy Award-winning performance in Cat Ballou, 1965, where he had already demonstrated a knack for comedic Western roles, making him seem like an ideal fit. However, there was one glaring issue. Marvin was not a singer, nor did he have any interest in becoming one. Despite his reluctance, Paramount believed that his sheer star power would outweigh his lack of musical ability, and after extensive negotiations and a hefty paycheck, he agreed to take the role, on the condition that he would not be forced to sing in a traditional Broadway style. With Marvin locked in, the studio turned its attention to the role of Pardner, a younger, more idealistic character who serves as a contrast to Marvin's grizzled prospector. Paramount initially pursued actors with some musical experience, considering the likes of Paul Newman, Warren Beatty, and even Robert Redford. However, none of them were interested in taking on a musical Western, which was quickly becoming viewed as a risky proposition in Hollywood. Enter Clint Eastwood, who had become a household name thanks to his starring role in Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy, which redefined the Western genre with its gritty, morally ambiguous storytelling. Eastwood, known for his stoic, laconic screen presence, was an unconventional choice for a musical, but Paramount believed his involvement would draw in audiences who typically wouldn't watch traditional song and dance films. Unlike Marvin, Eastwood was open to the idea of singing, though he had no formal training and had never performed in a musical before. When screen tests confirmed that his voice was passable, albeit limited in range, the studio decided to move forward, convinced that Eastwood's charm and natural screen presence would compensate for any musical shortcomings. The biggest challenge, however, came with casting the film's female lead, Elizabeth, the woman who ends up in a polyamorous marriage with both Ben and Pardner. The role required an actress who could hold her own against two larger-than-life male leads while also bringing a sense of elegance and romantic depth to the story. After considering several actresses, including Julie Christie and Faye Dunaway, the studio ultimately went with Jean Seberg, best known for her role in Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, 1960. Seberg was a respected actress, but she was not a trained singer, and like Marvin and Eastwood, she struggled with the film's musical demands. Still, her ethereal beauty and strong acting skills made her the best choice in the eyes of the producers, who hoped her presence would add an air of sophistication to the film. As casting wrapped up, concerns began to mount over whether the three leads, none of whom were professional singers, could carry a musical film. To address this, the production team made the controversial decision to tailor the music around the actors rather than forcing them to conform to traditional Broadway standards. This meant simplifying melodies, adjusting keys, and, in Marvin's case, embracing his lack of musicality rather than trying to hide it. His rendition of Wand'rin' a Star, delivered in a gravelly, almost spoken-word style, would later become one of the film's most infamous musical moments, both celebrated and ridiculed in equal measure. Behind the scenes, tensions arose between Marvin and Eastwood, who had vastly different approaches to acting. Marvin, a methodical and often unpredictable performer, was known for showing up on set in varying states of intoxication, which made filming unpredictable. Eastwood, by contrast, was professional and disciplined, preferring efficiency over spontaneity. Their on-set dynamic was further complicated by the fact that Marvin was the clear lead, despite Eastwood's rising star power, leading to occasional clashes over screen time and character development. Seberg, meanwhile, found herself caught between two dominant male co-stars, struggling to carve out a strong presence in a film that was largely driven by the antics of its two leading men. Beyond the primary cast, the studio sought to fill out the ensemble with a mix of seasoned character actors and newcomers who could bring the film's rough-and-tumble mining town to life. Ray Walston, Harve Presnell, and Tom Ligon were among those cast in supporting roles, helping to round out the world of Paint Your Wagon. However, as rehearsals began, it became clear that the film was facing an uphill battle. The actors were not comfortable with the musical numbers, the script continued to undergo rewrites, and director Joshua Logan was growing increasingly frustrated with the lack of cohesion in the project. Despite these challenges, Paramount remained committed to the film, sinking more money into production and banking on the star power of Marvin and Eastwood to carry it to box office success. The next phase of the production, the actual filming, would prove to be even more chaotic, with budget overruns, extreme weather conditions, and behind-the-scenes conflicts threatening to derail the entire project. With the cast in place and Paramount investing heavily in Paint Your Wagon, production officially moved forward, but from the very beginning, it became clear that the film was going to be a logistical nightmare. The studio had chosen to shoot on location in the mountains of Baker County, Oregon, rather than use sound stages or artificial sets, believing that the natural beauty of the Pacific Northwest would add authenticity to the film. While this decision made for stunning cinematography, it also introduced a host of problems that would plague the production for months. The location was remote, requiring the construction of an entire frontier town from scratch, which included not only the buildings seen on screen but also the necessary infrastructure to house and feed hundreds of crew members, extras, and animals. Paramount's budget ballooned as costs skyrocketed to accommodate the logistical challenges, with the original $10 million projection quickly climbing past $20 million, making it one of the most expensive films of its time. The first major issue arose with the weather. Oregon's mountainous terrain, while visually breathtaking, was wildly unpredictable, with sudden storms, heavy rainfall, and even snowfall disrupting shooting schedules. The crew constantly had to delay filming due to muddy conditions that made movement difficult and dangerous. Roads leading to the set would often wash out, making it nearly impossible to transport equipment and supplies, and because of the high elevation, temperatures fluctuated dramatically, creating miserable working conditions for the actors and crew. Marvin, who had a reputation for heavy drinking, began consuming even more on set, sometimes showing up too intoxicated to perform, which forced the crew to reshuffle scenes or shoot around him. While his larger-than-life presence worked for the character of Ben Rumson, his unpredictable behavior led to numerous delays and reshoots, further escalating costs. Meanwhile, Clint Eastwood, known for his no-nonsense approach to filmmaking, grew increasingly frustrated with the inefficiencies plaguing the production. Accustomed to working on lean, fast-paced spaghetti westerns, he struggled with the slow-moving, extravagant nature of Paint Your Wagon, where long musical numbers and elaborate setups stretched the schedule far beyond what he was used to. Eastwood was also not fond of the film's director, Joshua Logan, who was known for his theatrical background but had little experience handling large-scale outdoor productions. Logan, a perfectionist with a tendency to micromanage, insisted on endless takes and reshoots, which only added to Eastwood's impatience. The two men frequently clashed, with Eastwood pushing for faster, more efficient filmmaking while Logan insisted on his meticulous approach, leading to tensions that were palpable on set. Beyond the human conflicts, the sheer scope of the film's production led to unprecedented logistical challenges. The film required an enormous cast of extras to populate the bustling mining town, many of whom were actual residents of the area hired to bring authenticity to the background scenes. However, managing such a large group in a remote location proved to be a logistical nightmare, with food shortages, supply chain issues, and occasional outbreaks of illness spreading through the camp. The production also had to deal with the presence of wild animals, as bears and other wildlife frequently wandered onto the set, sometimes disrupting filming and causing safety concerns for both actors and crew members. The combination of bad weather, Marvin's erratic behavior, and constant delays meant that what was initially planned as a 5-month shoot stretched on for nearly 10 months, creating massive cost overruns that left Paramount executives scrambling. Adding to the chaos was the fact that none of the leads were natural singers, which complicated the already difficult filming process. Since neither Marvin nor Eastwood had the vocal ability to perform live on set, all musical numbers had to be pre-recorded, which created an unusual situation where the actors often struggled to match their on-screen performances with their pre-recorded vocals. Marvin, in particular, was notorious for his unconventional singing style, and because he often slurred his words or delivered lines in an unpredictable rhythm, the sound department had an extraordinarily difficult time ensuring that his musical performances synced properly with the film. Despite these challenges, one of the film's most iconic moments, Marvin's rendition of Wanderin' Star, would go on to become an unlikely success, with the song eventually topping the UK music charts, proving that sometimes, even the most unconventional performances could strike a chord with audiences. Jean Seberg, the film's female lead, also struggled under the weight of the production. Already facing challenges in balancing her performance between two dominant male co-stars, she found the grueling shooting schedule and the constant rewrites exhausting. To make matters worse, she was unhappy with her singing voice and reportedly clashed with the music department over how her songs were being handled. Unlike Eastwood, who reluctantly embraced his singing role, Seberg was deeply insecure about her musical performances, and the pressure only mounted as the production dragged on. The stress of filming, combined with the extreme conditions on set, took a toll on her physically and mentally, making her one of the many casualties of the film's troubled production. With production costs spiraling out of control, Paramount found itself facing a dire situation. The film was now vastly over budget, with no end in sight, and executives feared that they had a potential disaster on their hands. To make matters worse, the 1960s musical boom that had initially made Paint Your Wagon seem like a safe bet was beginning to wane, with audiences showing signs of fatigue toward the genre. Films like Dr. Dolittle, 1967, and Star, 1968, had underperformed at the box office, signaling that the era of big-budget musicals was coming to an end. Paramount knew that they needed Paint Your Wagon to be a massive success to justify the investment, but with so many problems plaguing the production, confidence in the film's commercial prospects was beginning to waver. As filming finally wrapped up after nearly a year, the focus shifted to post-production, where editors faced the daunting task of piecing together a film that had been shot under extreme conditions, with constant script changes and wildly inconsistent performances. The film's marketing campaign would have to work overtime to convince audiences that Paint Your Wagon was worth watching, despite the behind-the-scenes chaos that had nearly sunk the production. With the film finally nearing completion, the question remained: could Paramount salvage what had become one of the most difficult productions in Hollywood history, or was Paint Your Wagon destined to be remembered as one of the industry's greatest failures? As Paint Your Wagon limped into post-production, one of the most pressing concerns for Paramount was the film's music. The original Broadway show had been built around a carefully structured score by Alan J. Lerner and Frederick Loewe, but after months of script rewrites, cast changes, and on-set struggles, the film's musical identity was barely recognizable. Some of the original songs had been cut entirely, while others were reworked beyond recognition to fit the abilities of the cast. Andre Previn, who had been brought in to modernize the score, found himself caught between conflicting creative visions. Joshua Logan wanted the music to remain as true to the original stage production as possible, while Paramount's executives demanded more commercially viable, pop-oriented arrangements that would appeal to a mainstream audience. The biggest challenge, however, was that neither Lee Marvin nor Clint Eastwood had the vocal ability to carry a traditional musical. Marvin, in particular, had no formal training and often struggled to stay on pitch. Instead of forcing him to conform to a conventional singing style, the producers decided to lean into his rough, spoken-word delivery, which resulted in the now infamous rendition of Wand'rin' Star. Despite initial skepticism, the decision proved to be a surprising success. Marvin's deep, gravelly voice gave the song an unexpected emotional weight, transforming what could have been an awkward performance into a haunting, melancholic ballad. When the soundtrack was released, Wand'rin' Star became a hit, reaching #1 on the UK charts and outselling the Beatles at the time, a feat that shocked everyone involved in the production. Clint Eastwood, on the other hand, was at least willing to attempt singing, though his performances were heavily edited in post-production. His song, I Talk to the Trees, was meant to showcase a softer, more romantic side of his character, but the recording process was fraught with difficulties. Eastwood's voice was thin and reedy, lacking the power needed to carry a musical number, and despite multiple takes, his final performance still fell flat. To compensate, the sound engineers had to subtly manipulate the recording, adjusting the pitch and layering in orchestral support to mask his vocal shortcomings. While Eastwood was embarrassed by his own singing, he was contractually obligated to promote the soundtrack, leading to some awkward interviews where he downplayed his musical involvement. Years later, he would joke that Paint Your Wagon should have been called Paint Your Ears Shut. Jean Seberg, already struggling with the grueling filming process, found herself equally dissatisfied with her musical numbers. Unlike Marvin and Eastwood, she did not record her own songs. Her vocals were dubbed by Anita Gordon, a professional singer who was brought in at the last minute to salvage Seberg's performances. While Gordon's voice was technically proficient, the mismatch between her refined singing style and Seberg's on-screen persona was glaringly obvious, making the dubbing one of the more jarring elements of the final film. Seberg was reportedly humiliated by the decision, feeling that it undermined her credibility as an actress, and her relationship with the studio soured as a result. The film's choral numbers, which involved large groups of miners and townsfolk singing together, also posed unexpected difficulties. Many of the extras were not trained singers, and because the film had been shot outdoors in harsh weather conditions, recording clean audio on set was nearly impossible. To address this, the studio opted to re-record many of the group numbers in a controlled studio environment, requiring the actors to lip-sync in post-production. This decision created additional continuity problems, as certain takes didn't perfectly match the on-screen performances, leading to awkward synchronization issues in several musical sequences. Adding to the chaos, Paramount executives continued to second-guess their decisions, frequently ordering last-minute changes to the soundtrack in an attempt to salvage the film's commercial viability. Some of these changes included the removal of songs that were deemed too slow or outdated for contemporary audiences, while others involved the addition of new instrumental pieces to fill in awkward gaps left by the constant rewrites. The result was an inconsistent musical landscape where some numbers felt integral to the story, while others seemed haphazardly inserted. Despite all these issues, the film's score had its moments of brilliance. Nelson Riddle's lush orchestration provided a rich, cinematic backdrop that helped elevate even the weakest vocal performances, and certain songs, such as They Call the Wind Maria, retained their power despite the film's overall struggles. However, by the time Paint Your Wagon was ready for release, it was clear that the musical aspect of the film was one of its weakest elements. The final hurdle was marketing the film to an audience that had grown increasingly skeptical of musicals. By 1969, the Hollywood musical was in decline, with several high-profile failures signaling the end of the genre's golden age. Paramount's promotional campaign attempted to frame Paint Your Wagon as a new kind of musical, one that was grittier, more adult, and infused with the rugged spirit of the American West. Trailers emphasized the star power of Marvin and Eastwood, downplaying the film's musical elements in favor of action-packed moments and comedic highlights. This marketing approach created confusion among audiences, many of whom walked into theaters expecting a traditional Western, only to find themselves watching a film where the lead actors occasionally burst into song. As the release date approached, Paramount braced for impact. Would audiences embrace the film despite its troubled production, or was Paint Your Wagon destined to become one of the biggest misfires in Hollywood history? The answer would soon become clear as the film premiered and critics weighed in on what had become one of the most expensive, chaotic productions of its time. After nearly a year of shooting, followed by a tumultuous post-production period filled with sound issues, musical re-recordings, and constant editing, Paint Your Wagon finally arrived at the premiere stage in 1969. Paramount had high hopes for the film, given its massive budget, the star power of Marvin and Clint Eastwood, and the cachet of a big Hollywood musical, despite all the behind-the-scenes difficulties. The studio's promotional efforts were geared toward framing Paint Your Wagon as a hybrid western, a gritty and new kind of musical that could appeal to a broader audience beyond traditional musical fans. However, the film's marketing campaign became a double-edged sword. While it attracted viewers expecting a western, they found themselves in a film that merged musical numbers with rough-and-tumble adventure, creating confusion rather than excitement. The premiere itself was a grand affair, and anticipation was high due to the star-studded cast and the sheer scale of the film. However, critics were not kind. Despite the commercial success of its soundtrack, which boasted the hit song Wanderin' Star, the film itself received scathing reviews. Many critics pointed out the film's lack of cohesion, with its awkward blending of Western genre conventions and musical numbers that felt forced and out of place. The performances were often criticized, especially Marvin's unconventional singing, which, while memorable, was also jarring for audiences expecting a more polished musical experience. Clint Eastwood, despite his appeal as a tough leading man, was often seen as out of his depth in the musical sequences, with many reviewers questioning his suitability for the genre. Jean Seberg, too, faced criticism, with her performance overshadowed by the behind-the-scenes struggles of her singing voice being dubbed, which further alienated some viewers who could sense the disconnect. The film's box office performance was initially disappointing, which wasn't surprising given the negative reviews and the film's mixed identity. Audiences were perplexed by the film's tone, unable to reconcile the juxtaposition of serious Western action with the absurdity of musical numbers. Paramount had spent a fortune on the film, both in terms of its lavish production values and the delays caused by on-location shoots, rewrites, and casting complications. While Paint Your Wagon made back some of its investment, it didn't achieve the blockbuster status Paramount had hoped for. In the wake of its initial failure, the studio quickly rebranded the film as a cult curiosity rather than a mainstream hit. Despite the commercial underperformance, Paint Your Wagon gradually gained a devoted following, particularly in Europe, where its quirky blend of Western and musical elements was appreciated for its audacity. In the years following its release, the film became more of a cult classic, finding a second life through television broadcasts and home video rentals. The soundtrack, particularly Marvin's Wanderin' Star, which had been a surprise hit in the UK, enjoyed a resurgence, with its unique performance by Marvin becoming one of the most iconic moments in the film. Over time, fans began to embrace the film's eccentricities, appreciating it as an oddball Western musical that didn't quite fit into any existing category, but still managed to deliver memorable moments. Interestingly, while Paint Your Wagon didn't receive much recognition during its initial release, it had an enduring impact on both Clint Eastwood and Marvin's careers. For Eastwood, the film was a difficult but formative experience. Though the film's failure was an anomaly in his career, which continued to ascend with gritty westerns like The Outlaw Josie Wales, 1976, and the Dirty Harry series, the experience of working in a musical, albeit an unconventional one, added to his versatility as an actor. It also cemented his reputation as someone willing to take on risky and unexpected roles, despite the public's perception of him as a stoic, hard-edged actor. Marvin, on the other hand, would continue to build on his persona as a hard-drinking, anti-hero actor, but Paint Your Wagon remained one of the more curious entries in his filmography. His performance as Ben Rumson, though controversial, stood out as an example of his willingness to take creative risks, even when the final result was far from conventional. The film's eventual reappraisal and the subsequent embrace by a niche audience marked a significant shift in how Hollywood viewed genre-blending films. Paint Your Wagon became one of the first films to combine the Western and musical genres in such an overt way, and while the execution was often awkward, it nonetheless paved the way for future films that would explore genre fusion more successfully. In some ways, Paint Your Wagon was ahead of its time, pushing boundaries in a way that films from the 1970s onward would begin to explore more fully. Its legacy, however, was ultimately shaped not by its commercial or critical reception, but by its unique place in the history of Hollywood musicals. Paint Your Wagon stands as a testament to the audacity of filmmakers who dared to take risks, even when those risks didn't always pay off in the traditional sense. Today, it's a film that's looked back on with a mix of fondness and bemusement, remembered for its stars, its unorthodox blend of genres, and its bizarre yet unforgettable musical numbers. In retrospect, it's clear that while Paint Your Wagon may not have achieved the success it was envisioned to have, it nevertheless carved out a space in film history as one of the most unconventional and unpredictable productions Hollywood has ever seen.